The story begins not on a battlefield, but in a field of green. During the final years of World War II, American troops occupying Japan were confronted not with guns or fortifications, but with a plant so productive it could reshape the way nations think about food security. This plant, known to Japanese farmers for centuries, had the capacity to triple yields under conditions that would normally leave fields bare. Yet, almost immediately after the war, the United States deliberately suppressed it, burying research, confiscating seeds, and ensuring it would not spread beyond a narrow circle of scientific study. For decades, this remarkable agricultural breakthrough remained hidden from the world, a footnote in wartime bureaucracy overshadowed by battles, politics, and ideology. The question historians, agronomists, and survivalists still ask today is simple: why? By the early 20th century, Japan had developed agricultural methods that were among the most efficient in the world. The country faced chronic land scarcity, frequent typhoons, and soil prone to erosion. In response, Japanese farmers perfected techniques such as intensive terracing, deep soil aeration, and innovative crop rotation systems. It was within this context that certain fast-growing, high-yield plants were cultivated, tested, and refined over generations. These were not exotic experiments. They were practical, survival-driven solutions to feeding a densely populated nation with minimal arable land. Among these, a particularly hardy plant, a variety of sweet potato known for its adaptability, stood out. It was resistant to drought, capable of growing in poor soils, and produced 3 times the usual yield of conventional crops. By the late 1930s, this plant had become a staple in rural Japan, used to buffer against famine and support local economies. Farmers understood its limits, but they also recognized its potential to stabilize entire communities in times of crisis. When American forces entered Japan in 1945, they were focused on rebuilding infrastructure, demilitarizing the country, and establishing political control. Agricultural experts accompanied many of these units, tasked with assessing food production capacity. In their reports, they noted something unusual. Entire plots of land that had been written off as infertile were producing multiple harvests annually. The responsible plant was identified and, at first, studied with curiosity. Agronomists marveled at its resilience, noting that it could grow in soil too sandy or too clay-heavy for conventional staples. In occupied Japan, where food shortages were widespread, this plant was not merely a scientific curiosity, it was a lifeline. Yet the plant's discovery coincided with broader geopolitical calculations. The United States had, strategic interests in shaping post-war Japan, including controlling agricultural exports, preventing local monopolies on essential food resources, and positioning American agribusiness as the dominant model. In this context, an independently thriving crop capable of producing 3 times the yield threatened more than just market assumptions. It challenged economic and political control. Historical documents show that American officials, while impressed, were concerned that the plant could destabilize established agricultural markets. The reasoning was, twofold. First, widespread adoption could undercut American exports to Japan. Second, there was a prevailing belief among policymakers that rapid, self-sufficient food production by the Japanese population might foster autonomy inconsistent with occupation objectives. As a result, research was classified, seeds were collected under military authority, and experimental fields were restricted. Reports recommending wider dissemination were either ignored or redacted. The suppression was not accidental. Correspondence between occupation agricultural officers reveals explicit instructions to limit knowledge of the plant to a narrow circle of scientists. Universities were discouraged from publishing results, and agricultural extension programs steered farmers toward conventional crops, often at lower yields. Over time, this plant despite its proven benefits, effectively vanished from the Japanese public consciousness outside its original rural strongholds. For historians and survivalists alike, this story has significance far beyond wartime politics. It demonstrates how simple agricultural knowledge, if ignored or suppressed, can have consequences for societal resilience. In post-war Japan, communities that retained access to the plant fared noticeably better during the initial famine years. Outside of these enclaves, reliance on conventional staples left populations more vulnerable to disease, malnutrition, and market fluctuations. From a survivalist perspective, the plant offers a case study in low-tech food security. Its ability to thrive under harsh conditions, resist pests, and produce multiple harvests per year makes it a model for anyone preparing for supply chain disruptions or extreme weather events. The lesson is not merely theoretical. Cultivating high-yield, resilient crops can be as strategically important as stockpiling food or water, particularly when modern infrastructure is uncertain or fragile. The decision to suppress this plant also illustrates a broader pattern in military and post-war planning. Governments frequently prioritize control and predictability over local adaptability. Strategic concerns often outweigh human welfare when a resource has economic or geopolitical value. In this case, a plant that could have prevented hunger and strengthened local economies was subordinated to considerations of market dominance and occupation policy. For modern historians, this is a reminder that wartime narratives extend beyond battles and treaties. They include the subtle, often invisible, mechanisms of control over knowledge, technology, and resources. Every so-called forgotten innovation carries with it a story of decisions made under competing pressures, where the potential for human benefit was weighed against perceived strategic risks. Had the plant been fully integrated into global agriculture after 1945, it could have accelerated recovery in post-war Japan and potentially influenced agricultural practices worldwide. Its adaptability to marginal soils would have made it invaluable in regions facing famine or environmental degradation. Crop diversification strategies might have evolved more rapidly, and lessons from Japanese intensive farming methods could have spread far earlier. Instead, decades passed before agricultural historians and botanists rediscovered its potential, by which time industrial-scale monoculture had become entrenched and much of the traditional knowledge had been lost. For those interested in resilience, survival, or the intersection of history and practical knowledge, this story really underscores the importance of preserving and disseminating information, especially when it can enhance human endurance. Understanding why innovations are buried, whether by accident, oversight, or deliberate policy, helps us recognize where potential solutions are overlooked in contemporary crises. It also encourages a re-evaluation of local knowledge systems, which are so often dismissed in favor of industrial or commercial models. In a broader sense, this episode challenges assumptions about progress. Technological advancement is not always linear, and the availability of a resource does not guarantee its use. Social, political, and economic considerations can profoundly influence which solutions endure and which are, hidden. Recognizing this pattern allows both historians and survivalists to anticipate where overlooked opportunities may exist today, whether in agriculture, energy, or other critical areas. The story of this Japanese high-yield plant is ultimately a story of vigilance. It reminds us that even modest practical innovations can carry immense significance, yet they are only as effective as the systems that support them. When knowledge is buried, the consequences can ripple across decades, affecting health, stability, and resilience. By studying these overlooked histories, we gain perspective not just on what happened, but on how human decision-making shapes the availability of life-sustaining resources. For modern viewers, the lesson is clear. Historical awareness matters not only for understanding the past, but for informing strategies that ensure survival and stability in the present and future. Preserving knowledge, testing resilient methods, and valuing overlooked innovations are essential practices, whether for a nation recovering from war or an individual preparing for uncertainty. If this exploration into overlooked wartime agriculture resonates with you, and you value careful historical analysis that connects the past to survival and strategy today, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts. Share this video with others who seek depth over headlines and help ensure these lessons from history are not forgotten.